Good afternoon and welcome to the CRCA members and guests. We're here today with Cotney's Attorneys and Consulting presenting on the vaccine mandate. So I am here as John Kenny, representing more of the business side of things, and I have my co-host, and I always love to do these webinars with him. I have Jeremy up in Canada, right live, and he's the legal side of this. How you doing today, Jeremy?
I'm very well, John. Thanks for the introduction. I guess this is our third or fourth one of these now, so I would concur. It's always a pleasure, and I hope everyone gets some good knowledge out of this today.
Oh, I'm sure they will. I got a sneak preview at the presentation. You got a lot of good stuff in here, a lot of great information. So a couple quick housekeeping items for everybody listening. We do have a handout available underneath the handouts. If you feel free to download it. It's in PDF format. It's got some tips on there from Jeremy. And also let you know our goal is to try to be done 10 to 15 minutes before the top of the hour, so we have plenty of time for questions. We're sure we're going to have some. So that being said, we're going to move along here. And we want to start out with what we're actually introduction, what we're doing. So as you're all aware, over the past 2 months, the governments across the country have begun implementing, various vaccination measures to curb the rise in COVID-19 cases and numbers. So again, this kind of goes back to Jeremy and I were talking about the other day. Every time we think we're coming through the outside of this, we seem to get pulled back in, and we've got to navigate through something new coming up. So this is the newest navigation of all. So all provincial governments have announced or have begun implementing some form of vaccine passport systems to restrict access to certain non-essential businesses. So to fully and only to fully vaccinated individuals, or in some instances, individuals who provide a recent negative COVID-19 test results. So I think that in itself really sums up the fact that this is more confusing and leaves us wide open. So that's why we want to go ahead and cover these items today. So the bottom line in that, COVID vaccines will be an essential part of life for the foreseeable future. And I think that is probably worldwide, we're going to be seeing that, and this isn't going away anytime soon. And that being said, I'm going to turn this right on over to you, Jeremy, and dig right into this, because there's a lot of good stuff coming up here.
Yeah, thanks, John. So as you guys can see, by November 15th, all contractors and subcontractors working in federal government workplaces are expected to be fully vaccinated. So essentially that means you need to have, in Canada, a mixed dose of an mRNA vaccine. You can have an AstraZeneca vaccine, and I believe there are different types of AstraZeneca, but you can have that one and another one, like a mRNA, Pfizer or Moderna, or you can have a single dose Johnson & Johnson, which probably isn't that familiar to many Canadians as it's not really available, but if you do have it, that one counts as well. So in the construction sector, this has already been coming down the pipeline. As everyone probably has seen, PCL and Ellis Don announced a while ago that they would enforce a mandatory vaccination policy on their employees and their staff. And that kind of policy is starting to just become common right across the construction sector. We've already seen it in, hospitality, entertainment, fitness, anywhere you try to go. In Ontario, where I live, you need to have some sort of proof of vaccine. And at least for the time being, that is just going to be the norm. One major problem is in the construction sector, it seems as though it is heavily under-vaccinated. So as you can see again, Ontario and Alberta are the worst culprits for this. 27% of construction workers. Now this is like maybe a week old that we found this information, so maybe it's gotten slightly better, but we'll just assume, around a quarter of workers from Alberta and Ontario in the construction sector are not vaccinated. So that poses a big problem. If you're, an employer, there are a few things you can do to increase your vaccination rates, but for now, yeah, it's definitely an under-vaccinated sector.
I think what you pointed out there is, you're correct. It may go up a little bit, but you're still looking at probably anywhere from 3/4 to 2/3 of the construction workforce that needs to have this happen in a very short period of time. So that's an undertaking in itself.
Yeah. So obviously, and I've spoken and written about this before, there are some issues that come up with vaccines. So in Canada, privacy law is, pretty strong in the regard about asking for medical records. Traditionally, it's only been sectors such as healthcare, sometimes long-term care with certain circumstances, and sometimes education workers like teachers in very specific circumstances have had to disclose what vaccines they may have. Now, obviously, it's getting to the point where it's becoming more rampant to ask people what their vaccination status is, and construction is no different. So the privacy issues that have to be navigated here are complex. If you are an employer who already has, people on contract, and you're now introducing this new term where you have to disclose your vaccine, that's introducing a unilateral term to a contract that wasn't there before. Whether or not this really matters in the short term, it remains to be seen, but we just don't know. The second problem, or issue, I should say, human rights. So in Canada, again, we have the Human Rights Code, and the various provinces have different iterations of human rights law. But the gist of it is, if you have, say, a sincerely held religious belief, you can sometimes be exempt from vaccine mandates. So this wouldn't be just you don't want to get it and cite I'm Catholic or Jewish or something, It has to be a core part of your religion. Now, this is new territory. People are trying to make new arguments as to what constitutes a core part of a religious belief or a sincerely held belief. But for the most part, most legal experts think, and I concur, that that is a tall hill to climb, and it is likely not going to work unless you have a really good argument. So if you're an employer and you've got employees who are stating that they've got this exemption, I would be hesitant to accept it. Now, that doesn't include medical exemptions, which are a whole other can of worms and fall somewhere in the realm of privacy, human rights, and the common law. So I'll just lump medical issues into the common law exemptions, because that's traditionally where they've fallen. If you medically cannot have a vaccine, then you can't have a vaccine. If you're an employer and a employee comes to you with a doctor's note saying they can't get a vaccine, you have to accept that. Now, that doesn't mean they can't be tested. So if you've got an employee who can't get a vaccine for some sort of medical reason and they have a note, you can still impose testing requirements. So there is a lot to work out here. And again, John and I were discussing before that we try and get through this quickly to answer questions people have at the end. So if you're in that situation, we'll try and, answer your question at the end. Now, or do you want to just go back a slide there? I just should go quickly over this.
Gotcha.
Okay, thanks. So mandatory vaccination policies, I've written a bit about this. Again, they're not necessarily mandatory, partly because of the reasons I elucidated there. But if you're not in a federal workplace and you haven't been subjected to, and you're not working on federal job sites and you haven't had, you don't have contractors that are engaged in that kind of work, you don't technically yet need to have a vaccine policy where everyone has to be vaccinated. You can develop one, and especially if you're an employer who has a lot of vaccine hesitant employees, you can work around this for now. It is possible with testing and different ways of, increasing your safety measures. And in fact, as we all know, through OSHA, the Occupational Health and Safety laws, you have an obligation to protect your employees and your workplace and anyone coming on your job site. So if you don't have a mandatory vaccination policy, it does increase the burden on you as the employer, and it does increase your liability. So keep that in mind if you don't want to impose a mandatory vaccination policy. All right, John, sorry about that. We're good. Okay, yeah, so basically, if you do choose to implement the vaccination policy, sort of in line with what the feds are doing, there are different types of policies you can implement. You can give a long lead time. You can give people an incentive, and we've attached, like John said at the beginning, we've attached a little information sheet on the ways you can incentivize your employees to get vaccinated. So I encourage you all to read that. You need to take into account human rights legislation in whichever jurisdiction you're in. You need to take into account privacy legislation and be very careful with record keeping when you are requiring people to disclose medical information. And you need to impose penalties on staff and employees who don't get vaccinated. Now, they need to be gradual, just like any other penalty, and they need to be in compliance with the ESA. I say that in Ontario, but the Employment Standards Act in whichever jurisdiction you happen to be in. So keep that in mind, and I would strongly encourage you to create these policies with your counsel. Here we go. If you are an employee, as we all know, non-unionized employees generally don't have as many avenues to fight things, and the vaccines are no different. You may have seen in the news, for instance, that the Toronto Transit Commission said they would back employees who didn't get vaccinated. Various police unions across Canada and the US are backing their employees who don't get vaccinated, and that's good for them. But if you're non-unionized, you really don't have much protection in this area. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but if you're an employee and you don't have a legitimate medical reason, that would be the I guess top way to get out of getting a vaccine, a doctor's note. Then you have a tough battle to climb. Obviously, you can sue. And as a lawyer, I can tell you that will take you a long time, and you'll probably be broke by the time it's over. So that's not really your best option either. However, you do have an argument, constructive dismissal. And without getting into the details of that too much, if you're an employee who has a strong objection to getting vaccinated, constructive dismissal is a legal mechanism wherein your employer has essentially made it impossible for you to continue doing your job through no fault of your own. They've pushed you out, essentially. So that's an argument many will use. Wrongful dismissal, that's where you're making the argument that the vaccine mandate is you being terminated for no reason, right? That you didn't do anything wrong, you're doing your job, you just didn't get a vaccine, therefore you've been illegitimately fired. A different route to take, but a route nonetheless if you want to make that argument. And then we don't need to go over this a whole lot again, but human rights complaints, and privacy complaints, which for the reasons I've spoken about, can be an avenue for an employee to make the case they don't need to get vaccinated. Whether or not these work and how quickly they would work, I don't know, remains to be seen. It could take quite a while. So be cognizant of this. If you're a construction employee listening in right now that and you're thinking about rejecting a vaccine mandate, you will have a tough hill to climb unless you have a medical condition in which you can get a no. All right, we can go on here now. Okay, so this slide has to do with which sites, like for the federal vaccine mandate, which types of exclusions there are from that. So if you're under construction site that has a construction under the custody of a construction manager, you're exempt. Contracts for services performed outside of Canada, or contracts that are solely for the provision of goods. Although I will say something about this too. Recently, the truckers unions and truckers generally have been saying that the American government's insistence on vaccinated people coming in and out of the United States, which is a relatively new thing, could cause major supply chain disruptions between Canada and the US. So the provision of goods, even though Canada says, it doesn't have to be mandated, it still may mess up your job if you can't get into the United States, if you're a trucker or a supplier. So, it's starting to affect other areas. Contracts for services are solely performed in non-federal government workplaces, so provincial governments. Situations where federal employees must enter contractor facilities, and contracted personnel who will only access common areas of buildings that are open to the public. So sort of like a non-essential workplace situation, like we're never going to ban people from going to the grocery store. This would be analogous to that. But that's it. So for the most part, you need to get vaccinated if you're dealing with the feds.
So jumping into looking at this from a business standpoint, because it costs money. There's no doubt about it. It costs time and money. So I want to cover a little bit tips on non-government contracts, because this kind of ties back to your general contractors and/or owners that are going to mandate it. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. We're seeing it here on the state side as well as what we're seeing going on up there, as Jerry and I were talking and he brought up earlier. So where compliance with vaccination mandate is required by contract, which would be a private side, the cost and schedule implications of this mandate, you have to address them. And we recommend sooner than later. A lot of times you're going to have a new project coming out to bid, and these should be addressed right up front into the bid documents, knowing that, and you need to account for whatever your costs are going to be, to abide by whatever their particular mandates are. So that's maybe not so much difficulty moving forward on new contracts, but when you have compliance and vaccine mandates requested under existing contracts, you need to go for a change order. They're going to maybe tell you no, you can't, but that's where it comes in. And again, I kick it back over. That's why Jeremy's there if you need help with any of that. But you got to document this, because this can be very expensive. What if you can't meet the amount of people you need vaccinated to get on the job site to hit your schedule? So you could end up going into liquidated damages, and I mean, it just goes on and on. So you want to address these earlier, and definitely not head in sand when it comes to these issues on the non-government side as well. Now, cost and schedule implications mandate on the government contracts, a little bit different. And Jeremy, at the end, please chime into any of this. As far as it goes, your hands may be tied a lot more than you want them to be on this, because they're being driven through regulations. But existing contracts and contractors, contractor personnel who access the government of Canada workplaces to perform work pursuant of existing contracts are subject to this. So I'm really not sure if there's any loopholes that you're going to get around on some of this, as far as scheduling and all that. Hopefully that will all come more to light. But, and you're only considered fully vaccinated, as Jeremy brought out earlier, if you've had one of the following, doses in different manufacturers of the vaccines. So that's the only thing that gets you there. So the certification process is, as a contractor, you must submit a certification form by the end of this month, October 29th, coming right up, certifying that your personnel who access these sites are fully vaccinated as of November 15th. So it's kind of more of your plan coming out. And then failure to meet this, failure to meet this guideline can come all the way up to and including measures of terminating your contract. So again, before I move on to the next slide, Jeremy, let you chime in a little bit here. I'm sure that can come up to monetary damages and all that's associated with that, correct?
Oh yeah, so the knock-on effects from that can be severe. And so a lot of the regs, John, haven't been released about how the certification process will be enforced and monitored. Now, if I were to guess, and I think I'm correct, I would say that when these certifications are submitted, there won't be much follow-up for quite a while. It will be like analogous to some sort of an audit. And I would say for Ontario, and if in any other jurisdiction, the equivalent of, the Occupational Health and Safety Association or board or whatever, workplace health and safety, I would guess, and again, this is federal, so I'm not sure how they will, if they'll download it onto provincial authorities to check on this or what. It could just all be federally regulated, but I think what they'll do is they will check individuals, like a spot check, to see, okay, are you actually vaccinated and you work on this site? Because obviously certification form's just going to say everyone is. So if you're found to not have, if some employees are not or workers are not vaccinated, then likely your contract will be terminated, the government will sue you, and you will be out of luck for future contracts, at least as long as this mandate is in effect. So although it may seem as though it's very wishy-washy, this certification process, I'm guessing 3 to 6 months from now, we are going to be reading in the news about contractors who did not follow this to a T and have lost their government contract. And it's just so avoidable. So when you do that certification form, make sure you aren't messing about, that everyone is vaccinated, and also ensure that if someone does fraudulently submit their vaccine, or they've given some sort of fake card or something, that you're going to go after them, that you'll hold them liable personally if you lose a contract. So I think if you're the person who has to certify this, you want to put the fear of God into the employees to make sure, look, you better be vaccinated, because if we get checked on this and you're not, there's going to be hell to pay. So I can't reiterate this enough. Like, they're really not messing about here, the feds, and no one wants to lose a federal government contract. That's for sure.
Nope, it'll come back for years and years to haunt you for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I'll flip it back over to you, Jeremy.
Yeah, so again, this is more of what we were just saying. As of October 15th, so 4 days ago, bidders for contracts must submit a certification proving they meet the vaccine requirement as a condition of the bid. So bids that do not include the certification will not be considered. So already this deadline has passed. I think that, I would say most of the listeners here are aware of this already, that, there's certain requirements that have to be met. But in terms of how your policies should be internally, that's sort of up to you with how you are going to manage this. I would say that just like any other corporate policy you may have, that you're going to want to, again, draft it with council and have a consistent method of checking vaccinations. But if you don't have a lot of turnover, then this shouldn't be too difficult. You should be able to get this finished within a couple of weeks if you have consistent staff. And then any new staff you hire, just have it in your employment contract right off the hop. A condition of this employment is that you must present a valid vaccination, 2 doses for those vaccines, 1 dose for Johnson, and then that problem is taken care of right away with any new hires. So again, we're always happy to help with that if anyone needs help, but just make sure you're consistent with how you do it.
So one of the things, this does not matter whether you're in Canada, you're in the United States, or you're in Europe right now. This seems to be a common message that, I know you all see it on the news every night. The healthcare workers are overwhelmed. They have their own regulations in place, and people are losing jobs because they won't get vaccinated there as well. So we've now got these mandates that have been put in, and now we've got an overworked healthcare sector that we have to depend upon to get the vaccines to meet this mandate. So I think you have to also keep that in mind, especially as Jeremy was saying earlier about these spot checks that are going to come up. So that's why you got to really always be truthful. We all know that, but you got to be real careful how you're writing these plans and putting these together, because it's going to be difficult. This is going to take a while to get this through the system. You're not going to go from 27% vaccination rate to 90 or 100% overnight. This is going to take some time. So as these emerge, additional shortages of healthcare workers are going to add to your issues to meet these mandates, which again is going to be how many jobs you're going to be able to perform, what jobs you can get on with your labor power, how many jobs you may be able to bid in the future. So all these things got to be taken in consideration in managing your business forward from this point.
Yeah, I agree. John, I will say, I believe the construction sector, though, was 27% remain unvaccinated. So it's
Unvaccinated?
It's not as bad. It's not quite as dire. That would be the very devastating, given how little time we have left. So
well, that's actually pretty good numbers. Yeah, I apologize for picking that up wrong in the beginning.
That's okay.
But I clarified it, but I know right here in the U.S., we're probably less than 50% of the workforce vaccinated. We have these things going in, so it's a big touchy point in the construction industry.
Yeah, it is a problem here regardless, though. Like that 27%, there was a shortage anyway of construction labor. So, it's in Ontario and Alberta, it's a top 3 sector of the economy. So even with that many people unvaccinated who are potentially then unable to work, and a reduced pipeline of new labor, that number needs to get basically to like 90+% to avoid a complete slowdown again. So your point stands regardless. So anyway, I'm glad we're getting close to the end here, so we have more time for questions. Basically, and I said this earlier, it's a unilateral change to a contract to now impose on people that they have to be vaccinated, to an employment contract, or even to a government contract you may have. And there's regulations that they're going to release soon, I hope, on how existing contracts with the feds will be dealt with. I think that they are going to reach out, the Public Service Procurement Canada is going to reach out to those that they've already contracted with about how, this change will be dealt with as fairly as possible, but they're not going to budge. So even if you think you've got a good legal case and, you can afford to go to court, do it if you want to, but you'll still be left behind in the short term, because the feds are just going to say, all right, too bad, we're moving on, and we'll see you in court. So I feel that, and I understand people want to go that route quickly, but it's probably a bad business decision. And the last paragraph, everyone is just going ahead with vaccine mandates, and it's happening more quickly in Canada than in the US. I mean, I guess in certain states, John's in Florida and some of the other southern states have been less gung-ho on vaccine mandates. But in Canada, I think every province, even Alberta now, which has been the least likely to do this, is now decided, you know what, we're just going to do it too. So it's just a matter of how you want to balance your business and your perceived and real legal rights. So no matter how this all shakes out in court over the next year to 5 years, for now, everyone's going to have to play ball or you're going to be left behind. And that is just the bottom line, as everyone, I guess, has started to realize. So, it's just a matter of deciding where you want to be and what you want to do with your business. Luckily, I think in Canada, the vaccine rate is quite high, and those with valid medical exemptions are going to be allowed to keep working, and their life should carry on as normally as possible. But for the most part, this is happening, and there's not much anyone can do about it now. And hopefully it won't last long, but it's just the way it is for now.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point. I think one lesson we probably have learned, hopefully, as an industry and as a society, is we were not prepared for anything such as this pandemic. We all had to learn through it. So hopefully lessons learned, and we get through this last portion of the mandates and the vaccinations. But I think we all need to be prepared for the next round. I don't know if it'll be 100 years from now, maybe 10 years. We just don't know anymore. So hopefully we learn those lessons and we run our companies better forward moving forward, because there'll be something else around the corner. It may not be this, but it'll be something different. So that brings us to question time.
Totally agree.
Whitney, we're going to bring one more person on at live mic here. She can be able to feed us some question that we may have received.
All right. Hey, everybody. We do have a couple questions. I'm going to remind you all there is a questions box on the chat. So go ahead and send in any questions that you have. So in the meantime, we've got a couple right now. So I'm going to send it out there. John and Jeremy, this is for you. I understand that there are many possible lawsuits going to court in many provinces on challenges to vaccine mandates. These will most likely take many years to get a decision, if anything ever comes of it. What should contractors do in the meantime? It sounds like we have no choice but to abide by the mandates if we want to work.
Yeah. John, I guess I'll weigh in on this because it's a legal question. Yeah, so like I've been saying, it depends. If you're working with the feds, then yeah, you've got to abide. If you're working for, like, I hate saying this because lawyers always say this, but it depends. If you are a roofer working for, a homeowner who doesn't even ask the question, just, you just have a normal contract and COVID isn't even brought up and there's no, there's no mention of it, then you don't need to worry about it. It's a private interaction. It's a private contract between two private individuals, right? So it depends on the context in which you're doing business. For now, there is no law that says that if John is going to work on my house in Toronto, that he needs to be vaccinated. That doesn't exist, and I don't need to ask him for that yet. And I don't think that will happen yet, or that will happen necessarily. It could. I don't think it will, but it could. But I would say the best policy for now, if you want my honest opinion, is ask your employees to get vaccinated, and provide an incentive to those who are hesitant. And if there are some that cannot, then ask them to see a physician to confirm whether, if they do say they have a medical reason, ask them, you know, okay, well, can you get a note for that? They don't have to do it. They don't have to give it to you necessarily if it's not a part of their existing employment contract. But, you know, it would probably engender goodwill. And the way around that, you finding out, is to provide an incentive. Because if you provide an incentive like a little cash bonus, paid time off, then you, as the owner of the business, are adding a new term to the contract. You're giving consideration for that knowledge that they're vaccinated. So then you are entitled to that information. You can't do it without providing anything in return, but once you do provide something in return, then you can find out. So yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it is going to take years to find out whether this was legal or not, and likely the answer we'll get from the courts will be multifaceted, complicated, I would say. So for now, again, I would encourage anyone who has a specific situation that they're not sure about to reach out to your current counsel or to me, and find out what you should do in that situation.
Thanks,
think-
Jeremy. So this one you kind of already answered, but I'll just say it again in case you have anything you want to add. This person says, I run a small shop. Any ideas of how I can motivate or convince my workers to vaccinate? We have a few that are against it. What have you seen done in the US and Canada? I know you mentioned incentives, but I'll let you see if you want to elaborate on anything.
John, have you seen anything in the US like for our clients down there to help?
Yeah, so we are finding incentives work the best throughout. Whether you got to find out what motivates your team, because every team is motivated differently, whether it is, you know, a ticket to a future sporting event, or it is a, you know, gift card to something, or whatever that may be, you'll know that by your people. But generalize it. The only thing you can't do is have multiple values of these. So whatever you decide to abide by incentivizing, it needs to be the same across the board so that it's equal for all. I have found most of the companies that have put these incentive plans on that that I've worked with here, they've gotten up to probably the 95 to 98% fully vaccinated. Most people come forward to do that. They feel it's no longer being forced. You're being asked and you're being rewarded to do it. And honestly, even here in the US, you're going to get to a certain point where if someone refuses to be vaccinated, they're not going to do it no matter what you do. So you have to kind of get the best for the good. Overall incentive plan works well, and you're going to have to deal with the rest. And jumping back on, it kind of ties into what you just answered before. I think, yes, as a business owner, you got to make a decision of what's best for your company and where you're going to go, because this will eventually maybe not get down to the homeowner, but your private facility is going to require it. Your general contractors are requiring it. I think you're going to see this standardly written into all future negotiated contracts moving forward everywhere.
I know. And John, it's funny you say that, because I was just thinking, it's like you can do all these jumping through hoops, like for now with the people who, for whatever reason, don't want to get it. But yeah, this is mostly people from the CRCA, so you're subcontracting on a lot of stuff. The GCs, the big GCs, are gonna have this in their contracts, guaranteed by the new year, probably sooner. I'd say by the end of this month, more likely. And if you're running a business, it's your job to maintain the business over anything else. So if you've got a small team, like you just asked, and you've got some guys who are hesitant, I would start with the incentives, like John just said, and read. We attached a little white paper on that to the presentation, so I'd encourage you to read that. But yeah, the incentive works better than, the carrot works better than the stick, for sure. And, you know, it's unfortunate that you'll have to perhaps do that with the gift cards or anything, but honestly, it's a small price to pay to keep your business, you know, running smoothly. And life is just going to get more and more difficult for businesses that, you know, hold out on the vaccines.
It does move. You put the program in correctly. Honestly, it moves it more to a morale boost for your company. It works. It really does. Rather, no one likes to be, I don't care who you, no one likes to be told they have to do something. So if it's more of a reward factor, the ones that wouldn't be hesitant but are willing, you'll get them over on the side. It usually works out in the favor.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, so our
Brittany?
next question is, as a construction company in a union shop situation, what's the best way to ask for proof of vaccine?
Huh. That's a tough question because dealing with unions is tricky. So the first thing would be I would talk to the union rep and figure out, have an honest conversation with the union rep and say, look, this is something we need to deal with. Let's do it together, because you don't want to be telling a union it's this way or the highway, right? That's never a good route to take with unions. I would, yeah, you're gonna have to come up with a plan with the union rep to figure it out, because if the job requires vaccination and you can't figure it out, and it's obviously not in their collective bargaining agreement, because, you know, I'm assuming it wouldn't be, then yeah, you're gonna have to just be careful with how you approach it. But the unions are all aware of this too. You know, the unions know that the union membership knows that they're all likely going to have to get vaccinated. And, you know, there could be some strike action coming up both sides of the border over this. But I just don't see how that will be that effective. And I think the unions know that too. So if the person who asked this question wanted to follow up with me, because more detail here might be helpful, and I'd be happy to talk to them after the fact. But John, what's your experience with that in the US?
Well, I think in generalization, you brought up a good point. Have the open conversation, whether it be your shop store representative, but back to the union in your own company, or right to the, you know, the business agent, whatever representative you have the most contact with. Put the question out there. Say, you know, I'm forced in this situation. We got government work coming up, or you have general contracting contracts. They have it in it. They're, you know, mandated to do this. I need your help. How do you do it? What's your stance? You know, where does your union stand on this? You may find out, depending on the union, they're actually collecting this information inside, and they can give you a crew that is fully vaccinated. I have seen that here and recently, that they will give you crews that are vaccinated compared to maybe some members that don't want to be. But again, this is a very touchy subject, as you brought out earlier. And the best thing is, first, I would recommend open communication right with your locals.
Yeah, that's step one. And then, you know, if things get tricky, that's, John, also a good point. If they can give you a team of people who are vaccinated, then, you know, that can also help the union, because if there are union members that are refusing and they're getting left off jobs, then, you know, it's like, well, you know why? Because you're not vaccinated. So it can actually help both sides if you do that. So yeah, I would, yeah, the open communication, and I'd be happy to speak to anyone about any of your concerns after, but union issues, I like to think a little more about before I throw advice out willy-nilly, just because I've been dealing with unions for a while and it can get pretty tricky. So
we have another question that's on the same topic. So how do you ask for proof of vaccination for a non-union who is allowed to ask from the company?
That's easier. If it's a non-unionized employee, then you can just ask, especially if, I mean, their employment contract might be, again, if they're not vaccinated, you say, well, look, if you're not vaccinated, here is an incentive to get vaccinated. And if you don't, then it's going to be a problem going forward, and our hands are tied. So yeah, that's a lot easier to deal with. If it's a non-unionized employee, you would just say, look, here's the mandate. We're offering everyone $100 or whatever, to get, here's a gift card to a restaurant, whatever, like John was saying. And then you'll know who isn't right away, because those who did get vaccinated will obviously collect their, okay, I got my vaccine, I'll get my card. And then those who don't, you'll know who they are. And so then you can say, oh, why didn't you? What can we do to help you? Look, if you're not going to be able to work on these jobs going forward, which is a condition of your employment, you can couch it as, we're not letting you go, or we're not, we need you to work. And if you can't work because you're not vaccinated, then we can't keep you on, right? That's what it ends up coming down to. So that doesn't work as well it doesn't work at all with a union, but with a non-unionized employee, that's basically what it comes down to. John, would you agree?
Yeah, the only tips I'll add into that is just, I like to always, my job is keep away from the attorney side. So one is, whatever your incentive plan you're going to do, make sure it's in writing, make sure it's clean, clear, and straightforward, so no one can ever say, I didn't understand that, or why did he get something or she that I didn't? So that's one. Two, from a management side, I highly recommend that if you have a human resource department or human resource person, that's who you let handle this, because they have the confidentiality. No, you do not want to have your superintendents or your field foreman or anyone asking these questions. It mucks the water up. Or if you're a smaller company, as the question came before, whoever normally handles your onboarding and that confidential information that you need, that's who you want to head this up.
Yeah.
That's just kind of tips just to keep you out of trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I should have said that the HR department should.
You got to have me on for something, Jeremy, and I got to have you.
Yeah, don't get your lawyer to do it.
Okay, so we've got another one that says, what happens if you ask your employees to get vaccinated and something happens and they end up in the hospital? Can they sue the employer?
Well, yeah, that's another tricky question. So I've had people ask me this before, and I think we may have covered it in an article or something, but basically, if someone expresses that they have a problem, or they're they're nervous about it or something, or someone may have a pre-existing condition, you would ask them to go get a doctor's note before they, and I know this isn't directly asking or answering the question, but you would, anyone who may have an issue with this, you would want a physician to sign off on them getting the vaccine. Now, if it just happens to someone randomly, like someone who they shouldn't get sick, I know like myocarditis, it's a heart problem people can get from vaccines. That's probably the one you hear about the most. You just have a healthy worker who gets that when they get vaccinated. They could sue you. Yeah, you can sue anyone for anything by, technically. Would they be successful? I don't think so, because when they're administering the vaccine, you're tacitly acknowledge you're taking the risk on yourself. Now, the thing is, if you ask people to get vaccinated and you have provided an incentive, then that provides even less room for them to sue you, because they're saying, okay, well, I got vaccinated because I was incentivized to do so via cash or whatever it may be. So they're limiting your liability substantially by accepting the cash or whatever to get vaccinated. But you're never totally going to be immune from your employee suing you. No. But in this context, is it something you should worry about? I would say no. I don't think so.
Yeah, on business risk, I consider this to be at the low end compared to other risks.
It's a low risk. Yeah.
All right, the next question is, if most of my employees are vaccinated and I decide to start to initiate the incentivized plan on getting vaxxed, do I need to offer the incentive to the ones who are already previously vaccinated?
Yes.
There's no gray area on that.
Yeah, yes, you do. You do. Because multiple reasons. I'm sure John will agree on this. Business wise, it makes no sense not to do that, because the hatred you may engender from the ones who are already vaccinated, or the disdain, I'll say, hatred is a strong word, but the disdain you may engender from your employees who did get vaccinated, they'll be like, well, why the hell did I get vaccinated early, and they're rewarding these people who didn't. So that's just the practical reason. And then the legal reason is you can't, all things being equal, you can't give like a bonus of sorts to some people and not to others who have done the exact same thing, or like it's just, from an employment law perspective, it's just a lack of fairness to all your employees. So yeah, it's just not a good idea to do that. So yeah, I will unequivocally say that you have to offer it to everyone.
Okay, looks like we have one last question, and it is, as an employer, is there a template for the vaccine mandate policy that they can get?
Yeah, we have one, right, John?
We have one on shopcotney.com.
Yeah, we have one, and it's neutral between Canada and the U.S. I mean, it's not, it doesn't,
Yep.
it
You go
would
right
read
to
this.
Shop Cotney, it's available, we put it on there, it's inexpensive, and you can use it as a
Yeah.
template to apply any way that you need to, and whatever your particular situation is.
Yeah, and if you're a CRCA member, and you want my help editing it to some degree for your particular needs, then please reach out. Also, any of these questions, if you want follow-up help, whether or not you are a CRCA member, I'm happy to help you. So yeah, my email is jpower@cotneycl.com. And my number is 416-889-8738. So call or email, and I'll be happy to talk to you about any of these problems.
Was that our last question, Whitney?
We don't have any other questions. So with that, that is that.
Sounds great. And if you ever need to get a hold of me, you feel free, please, to give me a jkenny at cotneycl.com. Always willing to help out with any questions you have. And sometimes you may have a question you just want to hear from both of us. We're there. We look forward. We'll have another webinar probably coming up next month or within the next 45 days, whatever. Sure, be a follow-up or whatever the next hot topic is.
Yeah. I hope it's not COVID related. Please, please no.
Hopefully we'll get through that tunnel eventually. Well, that being said, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And again, you have any follow-up questions, please reach out, and we'll catch you all in the next one.
All right. Thanks, John. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Bye now.
Bye now.